Hello, my friends. We are diving back into the series Habits and Healing. And I love this series so much because I really do believe like habits and healing go so well together because habits and healing both require intentional changes that will lead to transformation down the road. When we are facing a challenge in life, we often need to break some old patterns and replace them with healthier patterns and healthier habits so that this will give us the structure that we need. It'll give us the opportunity to be grounded more, and it'll provide us with better ways to deal with stress and challenges. And I really do believe that habits and healing, it's not just about getting rid of old habits, but it's also about choosing new ones that is going to help us and grow and move forward in a healthier direction. So it's like kind of doing the hard work now, like all at once, so that our later selves will thank us. So today in this series, we are talking about boundaries. And I feel like boundaries kind of became one of those buzzwords in the personal development world. And everyone's like, create boundaries, boundaries, blah, blah, blah. And it kind of just became like a fad or like a trend almost. But I honestly feel like a lot of people, including myself at times, like it's like you don't know how to implement those. Like, give me practical strategies on how to implement these boundaries. So my goal for today's episode is to talk about why boundaries matter. Are they biblical? And what are some ways we can actually implement those boundaries? When talking about boundaries, for me, when I think about boundaries, honestly, I think about maturity and responsibility. Like those are like the two things that come to my mind. When someone has really good boundaries, I think of that person as wise, responsible, mature, that they know like who they are and what they stand for, and that they really like stick up for themselves. So like this person takes captive of the responsibility of their own life. So they're not going to face burnout as much, or they're not going to have resentment towards other people because they speak up for themselves and they know like when they're either going too far in like people pleasing, or they know when to say no to things because they're getting super tired and they need to put themselves first. And I think a lot of times people think boundaries are selfish, but I think that boundaries are loving. And I think this is because it protects who you are emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and it allows you to give from a place of abundance instead of lack. So without boundaries, you are pouring from an empty cup because you don't know how to go fill up your own cup first. So I said this in a previous episode, by not having your boundaries in place and not by putting yourself first, you're actually doing the world a disservice because you're not giving them the best version of you. So a lot of people think that it's like selfish to say no to people, but it's actually, sometimes it's loving and sometimes it's the right thing to do, because people shouldn't get like your leftovers. They should get like the full side of you. And with that said, they protect your peace. Boundaries protect your peace. So it prevents chaos from happening. So saying no sometimes, or putting up the grid lines of your life, is going to be honoring to yourself. It's going to be honoring to your spiritual self with God, and it's going to create space in your life. It's going to create margins for what truly matters to you. So if you're wondering if boundaries are biblical, they're actually God's design. So from the beginning in Genesis, the second chapter, we can see God talking about boundaries. Actually, in Genesis 1, we can see God talking about boundaries. He talks about the land and the sea, and that there are boundaries for the land and for the sea, and that even like the light and the day have boundaries, like they have their time. And then moving to chapter 2 in Genesis, we can see the story, the classic story of Adam and Eve, and we can see that boundaries are put in place for our protection. So God says in verse 11, you must not eat from this one tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you certainly will die. So God's not being a mean God. He is doing this for our protection. He's doing this to guide us towards life. He wants life for us, not death. And so he puts these boundaries in place to protect us from what is going to hurt us and like what is going to lead to the destruction. the narrow path that Jesus calls us to is basically a boundary, right? Like we could live of the world and have no boundaries on our life at all. And that would be the wide path. That would be, quote unquote, the easier path to live, because we would essentially have no boundaries to live by. But when we are following the narrow path that Jesus calls us to, we are following these boundaries to lead us away from destruction and into what like God has for us and what will lead to life for us. And we can even see, like, moving on, that Jesus models boundaries. Like, he takes time alone. We can see in Luke that he often like withdraws and goes away by himself to pray. Like, even Jesus needed alone time. And another thing is that Jesus had really good relational discernment. He didn't share his deepest, darkest secrets with everybody. He had close people in his life that he trusted, and he shared deep, intentional relationships with these people. And he had boundaries. So I think it's good to note that, you know, even Jesus wasn't afraid to say no or set limits or set boundaries. They're in place for a loving way. They're in place to keep us from harm and to lead us into life and life abundance. I think this shows us how intentional Jesus was, because it shows us that boundaries allow us to love others well without losing ourselves in the process. So maintaining both of those things, because like I said, you can't pour from an empty cup. So, you know, having those boundaries in place for protection. And another thing to note on this is, with boundaries, when you're setting boundaries, I like to think of a toddler, because well, we are God's children, so God can think of us like a toddler basically. And like a toddler would, people like to see how much they can get out of someone, like how much they can push somebody. And the less somebody pushes back, the more the other person will continue to take. So if there are no boundaries of saying no, and you're not strict to those boundaries, you are going to become like that pushover, and people are going to know that they can get away with things, and they're going to take advantage of that. Like, I think a lot of times when other people get upset about their boundaries, it's because it takes away from what they want. And if they know that you are that type of person that will stick up for yourself, people are more likely not to take advantage of you. So just like you would discipline like a toddler, like you have to stay strict to those rules that you create or those boundaries that you create. And a lot of time, why are those boundaries in place? It's for their protection, and staying strict to them reinforces to them that okay, I'm not just going to get my way. And the next time around, they're less likely to push, hopefully not as hard, because they know okay, I'm not going to get my way in this way. But if you give in time and time again, they will know, if I just keep trying, if I just keep pushing, if I just keep acting out, then I know I will get my way, and that reinforces that behavior. So keeping that in mind, that basically that's how God sees us, and also us with other humans, understanding from a behavioral standpoint, that's how people tend to be, is how far can they, how much can they get out of somebody? I feel that's just people's fleshly nature, and you staying true to yourself and being it's still a no. And hopefully next time around that they understand that they can't take advantage of you and that you're going to stick to your guns. And I think if you've been following the Lord for a little while now, you kind of realize that with sanctification comes boundaries. I think the closer you are growing, the deeper you are in your walk, you kind of get more convictions about things or discernment about things. So throughout your walk, you start to create more boundaries almost naturally. So with that discernment and with that conviction, things like certain TV shows, you might have this conviction that, wow, I don't think this is really serving me anymore. Or there might be certain friends that you might need to spend a little less time around, that, they don't bring you closer, or they don't bring you closer to who you want to be, not even just to God, but who God created you to be. And I think as we get deeper in our walk, the Holy Spirit convicts us to set boundaries around the people that we spend time with, the things that we do, and even our thoughts. So we start to kind of turn away from what doesn't honor ourselves, what doesn't honor God, and move towards what does reflect that. So moving into okay, that all sounds great, and I'm with you there, Sam, but how do I set and maintain that? I have no idea. As far as I know, if someone says, tells me to jump, I'm going to say how high because I'm so scared to let people down. If you fall into that category, keep on listening because we're going to talk about how to really reinforce boundaries. And not that I am like a professional in this, believe me, like I'm still learning as I go here. But the first thing is identify the need for boundaries. So reflect on areas in your life that feels so chaotic, like you are so drained, overwhelmed, and stressed. Like you are like, that part of my life is so chaotic. I just avoid it. I avoid it, but yet like it is just so hectic that I don't even know how to gain like the reins of it. Like identify what that is in your life right now. It could be finances, like it could be something along those lines. It doesn't necessarily have to be a person, but think of the area in your life that needs some order to it. And the next thing you're going to do is once you identify the need for boundaries. So what are the areas in your life that need those boundaries? You need to know your values. There's so many different value assessments that you can take out there. I really encourage you to do this because understanding your values, you'll start to live with more integrity. So you'll understand what matters to you and you'll start living according to that, hopefully. But the first thing that you need to do is understand what those values are to be able to do that. So once you identify those values in your life, ask yourself next time you're making a decision to do something, to hang out with someone, or anytime it might require you to say no, I want you to ask yourself, does this align with my values, my priorities, and my purpose, like my calling, like what I feel like God has called me to? Is this decision aligning and leading me towards that? So letting your values guide your boundaries. And now we're getting into the tough part. So now we know where we need them, how to identify if this is a good place for a boundary. Now we're talking about how to actually communicate those boundaries. And this takes practice. So we want to use direct and kind language and try to stay away from being like passive aggressive about it. So just like always in the mental health world, we always talk about I statements, like owning it, because the second you turn it towards the other person, they're going to get automatically defensive and make this conversation 10 times harder. So practice communicating in a kind but clear manner. So like, hey, Chelsea, I value our relationship so much. So I need to set some limits right now just so that we can continue to protect it. Or another example of this is I need to prioritize myself and my sleep right now. I have had terrible sleep lately and I know it's just not doing me well. So I can't really commit to that thing right now. I can't commit to dinner right now. Some people will resist your boundaries because they've benefited from the lack of them in the past. So they know, like I kind of mentioned with the toddler earlier, that if I can keep pushing, I'll eventually get my way. So if you are the type of person that has given in the past, like expect that to happen again. Like now that you're like, nope, I have strict boundaries now. Like no one's gonna try to walk all over them. Well, if you've given in the past, like you gotta build up that like reinforcement of yourself that no, I am a kind of person that stays firm and I don't let guilt sway me. When you are communicating boundaries, you have to, with some people in your life, you are going to have to set consequences with. So like if this behavior continues, I'm going to need to step away. And so your boundary, and if this behavior continues, and then state what's going to happen if they get crossed. And you have to be prepared to actually follow through with that. Because if you don't follow through with that consequence, then you're going back to what we just said, reinforcing that people can get away with it if they like try hard enough, that they can step over your line and cross that boundary, and that you're going to eventually give in anyways. This time it just came with a little bit more fight. So setting that consequence and sticking to it no matter how hard it is. And this kind of goes with it, is just sticking to your word. So holding firm in what you say that you're going to do, and holding firm in the boundaries that you've created for yourself shows others that you're serious about your boundaries, and it reinforces it. So the next time around, like I kind of mentioned with the toddler earlier, if you do stick to your guns and you were like, no, 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 eventually they are going to understand that it is a no. But if it's like a no, 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 and then just a yes randomly, they're going to know it's a lottery that they can, if I just push hard enough, that I'll finally get my way. So be ready to stick to your words. I just want to say that it's never too late to set boundaries. So it's never too late to teach others how to treat you. You're going to thank yourself later for enduring the temporary discomfort of setting these boundaries, because that long-term peace and, the chaos that we talked about, getting that chaos in order is going to feel so much better. So going through, like, being uncomfortable, what's my saying? Getting comfortable in the uncomfortable for the meantime, so that later down the road, you are so much happier with your decision that you made. You have so much more peace in your life. You have so much more respect from those around you. So sitting in it for like temporary discomfort for long-term comfort. So overall, boundaries are going to take effort. They're going to take practice, and they're going to take work. But don't forget that they are biblical, and they are there to protect you and protect those around you too, because they're making you a better person for those people around you in your life and for yourself. So for your kids and for your family, it's protecting them because they're going to get the best version of you. I really do believe that you have the power to set good boundaries for your life and for yourself so that you can live a life full of peace. And I hope you found value in today's episode. And I will see you guys next week for another episode in the series Habits in Healing. Thanks, guys. I really hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. And real quick, if you guys could do a huge favor and share this episode with somebody that you think would be blessed by it. And you can catch me during the week on Instagram at Sam DeSalvo. Have a great week, guys. Bye.